Thanks for staying and welcome back to Marketplace. Now to our very first story. Ghana is expected to receive some $116 million from the IMF in July. The funds would support the country's import activities should the IMF board successfully review the country's performance under the fund program. According to the IMF, Ghana has made progress in meeting some targets regarding the energy sector debts as well as recapitalizing troubled banks. Country representatives of the IMF, Dr. Natalia Koladinia, however, tells Joy Business more effort is required in other areas of the economy to ensure a successful review by the board.
Yes, we made very significant progress since we initiated the discussions under the fourth review during our April meeting. Now we much better understand the implications of the new policies presented by the government in the budget. We also welcome some of the measures that have already been implemented. For example, to give you one example is reducing the rigidities through the passing of the act on imposing a cap on earmarked revenues, for example. This is one example. At the same time, we still need to clarify some details on some other issues. And these are the issues like the debt of the state-owned enterprises and also how the government is going to improve, what is going to be done to improve their financial viability. The other issue is addressing the weaknesses in the banking system. At the same time, we are very optimistic that over the next couple of weeks we will be able to complete our work and start preparing the documents for the board.
And so, from what you're saying, it looks like the meeting would indeed happen in July and not in June, the board.
Well, George, I wouldn't really set any targets or dates, even though that would like our performance criteria. We don't impose performance criteria on ourselves. Yes, well, the board meeting, if we complete our discussions within a few weeks, then most likely the board meeting would be sometimes in July, yeah.
Are we making that much progress on all these targets, reforms, and measures that indeed the board can meet in July? And what people will be looking for is given the thumbs up of programs that we made so far, and then releasing that $116 million that Fitch was talking about.
Well, yes, I'm personally optimistic that the board would have a meeting for Ghana. And you're right, the situation is not that simple because the program veered off track last year. You know that there was a very significant fiscal slippage. Budget deficit in 2016 was 8.75% of GDP compared with the programmed level of 5.25% of GDP. So essentially, the fourth review needs to convince everybody that the program will be brought back on track. And this is one issue that the directors definitely would be interested in looking and discussing, how the program would be brought back on track. And more specifically, the measures which would restore fiscal discipline and facilitate support fiscal consolidation, which would be sufficient with bringing debt on the consistently and clearly downward path.
The continuous fall in commodity prices has not impacted negatively on government's earnings from traditional exports. That's the conclusion one may draw after going through the Bank of Ghana's economic and financial data ending April this year. George Rafi again has more.
According to the data, the state as at April this year secured almost $5 billion from traditional exports. Earnings from gold was $2.2 billion. Cocoa stood at $1.1 billion, while the state got $845 million from oil exports. Total earnings as at April this year is still higher than what is secured in the same period for last year. Persons close to government are attributing the pickup to increase in volumes exported, so that could make up for any drop in prices on the international market. The development could help show up government's revenue, which we understand has been experiencing some challenges in the first quarter of this year. The returns could also motivate cocoa farmers who are hoping for improved payments from government when the cocoa season opens later this year. For the mining firms in Ghana, it could be all smiles after most of them were forced to close down some mining sites because of declining returns due to falling prices on the world market.
That report was by George Wiafe. Moving on, the alleged clash of roles between the two port agencies, GCNet and West Blue, according to the Institute of Freight Forwarders, is unduly affecting clearing activities and revenue mobilization. But Chairman of the Finance Committee in Parliament, Mark Esibe-Yeboah, has emphasized the need for the two agencies to work together in the interest of the economy.
To our GCNet to find out about their operations, their challenges, and then today we are here.
So Honorable, sitting in here, and then you were at GCNet. I mean, when you went to GCNet, listening to both parties, there seems to be some kind of, perception. How are you going to deal with it?
The Vice President has indicated that people have to work together. They have to work together. GCNet, West Blue have to work together. Both of them have contracts. We are not going to cancel their contracts, okay? Now,
so GCNet's contract is not going to cancel, West Blue's contract is not going to
but a contract has to be honored. You don't want to be paying judgment debts. Okay, you can't do it. They have contracts. We have to respect contracts. So they just have to integrate their systems and work together, okay?
Meanwhile, Minister for Monitoring and Evaluation, Dr. Anthony Akotosei, also notes government has initiated steps to ensure maximum collaboration among stakeholders.
Go forward with what is best for Ghana. So it will be up to us. He's already given 3 directives. There are other things to be done as we go ahead. And him being in charge of economic management team has assured Ghanaians that what we are looking for is what is best for Ghana, not therefore.
Yeah, but you keep mentioning that government will have to make a decision. Can you give us a gist?
I mean, because I gave an example of the way Gapoha and customs were misbehaving. In my view, misbehaving. That kind of attitude cannot be good for Ghana. And so if somebody thinks that we are there because they want to have a therefore, then they'll be dealt with. But, I mean, what is best for Ghana is what we should all be thinking about. How to facilitate trade and enhance revenue. If attitude is in the way, that person would have to change the attitude, or they will have to be removed.
Are we going to see GCNet or West Blue going?
No, well, it's premature to say that. I mean, I clearly, it's not everything that they are doing that one can say is duplication. So it's not an issue of one or the other. We must define what everybody is doing properly. And if there's duplication, let's discuss it and remove it. After all, we are all doing it for Ghana.
Now, last Monday, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank reduced the policy rate from 23.5% to 22.5%, representing 100 basis points or 1 percentage point. This brings to 300 basis points or 3 percentage points reduction in the rate so far this year. But would this translate into reducing the cost of credit for businesses as expected, and how soon? Sheila Tamaklo explores the issue.
The policy rate is the benchmark rate at which the Bank of Ghana lends to banks. This essentially somewhat determines the cost of credit for businesses. Businesses have, however, always complained banks hardly reduce their lending rates, as expected whenever the Bank of Ghana reduces the benchmark rate.
The private sector has not seen corresponding decrease in cost of credit, and this is worrying. We think that there should be that realignment, you see, of key monetary policies and what happens in our commercial banks. The cost of credit in the country at the moment makes it difficult for businesses to be able to scale up, and more importantly, making businesses very competitive, especially when we want to go the export way.
To what extent are the concerns justified? Much as the concerns are largely legitimate, banks cannot entirely be blamed for this phenomenon.
In 2016, for example, the non-performing loans provisions made by the banks were significantly high. And therefore, I mean, they might want to be able to, reduce their risk, okay, in terms of, the credit that have been given out, reduce the non-performing loans portfolio by the, with almost all the banks. So I think that it will take a little bit of time for the banks to respond to the continuous reduction of the policy rate.
Businesses, however, insist they deserve a reduction in bank lending rates this time around, especially after the substantial drop of 300 basis points in the policy rate so far this year. But will banks accordingly reduce their lending rates to the relief of businesses, and how soon?
Already, interbank market has reacted. As at this morning, the interbank borrowing rate has fallen from 13.51 as at yesterday to about 12.51 this morning. And then I'm sure at the time that most banks will meet to fix their base rate, they will take the fall in rate into consideration.
In some jurisdictions, you have a situation where the central bank, through some regulation of a sort, would cap, the rate at which banks charge, borrowers. AGI has persistently recommended the capping of interest rate, such that if you have policy rate at 22.5%, then commercial banks should not be allowed to charge anything above 400 basis points or 4 percentage points above the policy rate. These are the kind of regulations that can come to play to ensure that the private sector can thrive.
I think that time has come that we have to really look at the build-up of the base rate. That's the formula. I think it's too rigid downward. Some of the key building blocks have to be really looked into so that it will make it more flexible. I do not subscribe to the idea that we say we should cap interest rates in the country. I don't subscribe to it. But what I think should be done is we should allow each bank to determine its own base rate without any formula guarding that, because otherwise it becomes more or less like a regulatory environment, regulating interest rates.
Currently across the country and across the banks, well, the average interest rate is at 30.5%. But with the new monetary policy rate at 22.5% and inflation expected to ease as we go down, well, it is likely that the next time you walk into a bank to borrow some money, the interest rates that you'll be paying this time might go down by a few percentage points. Reporting for Joy Business, Sheila Tamaklo.
It's still live on the marketplace. Let's now cross over to the Ashanti region, and the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, PIAC, is asking government to grant legal authority to the committee for prosecution of people who misuse proceeds from the country's oil resources. It says its present capacity of just compliance and project monitoring falls short of powers to well sanitize the system. A member of the committee, Dr. Afil Money, was speaking at the public forum in Kumasi on 6 years of petroleum production in Ghana.
About 100 participants representing pressure groups, professionals and religious bodies as well as traditional authorities attended the session. Dr. Moni, who is also president of Ghana Journalists Association, is confident granting PIAC prosecution powers will ultimately benefit the citizenry.
To be empowered legally to prosecute people who are found wanted in terms of the use of oil resources, or the people who are negligent in monitoring oil resources. It's a suggestion which is worth considering, so we'll table it at the right quarters with the hope that the right response will be found to this question. In fact, this is something which has come out so forcefully in this forum, and that our job should not rest in exposing the wrongdoing in certain quarters. Our job should be to extend to prosecute people who, as I said, have negligent, or people who have been people who are complicit in misusing our oil resources.
Financial journalists at the forum urged individuals and corporate institutions to position themselves for opportunities provided by the oil industry to boost the local economy. Beatrice Toshitoto is secretary of the Institute of Financial and Economic Journalists.
Own the industry. How do you own the industry? You need to get involved and get engaged in that. To do that, the industry requires certain services. It requires certain skills. This is where, as Ghanaians, we need to position ourselves to provide these services. For instance, if an oil company is operating in Ghana and they need water supply, you need to be able to position yourself as a businessman in Ghana who can supply that water to the oil company. But to do that, you also need to follow certain standards. And so it is the duty of any businessman who wants to play a role, or even any individual who wants to play a role, to read around the industry or engage with people who have knowledge about what the industry requires, so that you can benefit from it. Businesses can benefit from it. Even dressmaking, water supply services, hotel manager, cleaning services, all these people can benefit from the industry.
Reporting for Joy News, Nana Sensumensa.
All right, so joining me now to do a little more discussion on this particular development is a former member of the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, who is also the Executive Director of KIDE, Ishmael Ejekumihene. Ishmael, thanks for joining us on Marketplace and welcome.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Now, I remember very well that when you were a member of PIAC, you drummed home this particular fact. Now, why is it so necessary that we continue to make it a point that we should have we should give PIAC the prosecutorial powers to prosecute persons?
Well, I think it's about the role of PIAC and what happens if PIAC should make any adverse finding. What has tended to happen is you only make findings and you prefer recommendations, but then nobody seems to act on them. PIAC submit reports, they publish their reports, they meet with even the Public Account Committee as well as the Finance Committee of Parliament, but then you find same issues raised in previous reports still hanging. So, I mean, if PIAC doesn't have any power to enforce its recommendation, even when serious infractions have been detected, then it's almost like a toothless bulldog. So I think there has to be a system, a mechanism, a change in the law that allows PIAC to be able to actually carry through and insist on certain things being done. So I still believe that those powers is very necessary. If not, then I think the other stakeholders who are represented by the members of PIAC could also institute legal actions and ensure that some of these issues are enforced. For example,
now, Ishmael,
something.
Before you even move on, is it not an issue of separation of powers, for instance, because there are other institutions that exist which can prosecute people who are found culpable of such offences, and why PIAC? PIAC is just a monitoring committee. Why should it be enforced?
So, PIAC's role is almost like they've been put in a straitjacket that says that you do two reports. You submit the report to Parliament and also to the President.
Okay.
The law doesn't give PIAC, I mean, that's where technically PIAC's role stops. Okay, so, I mean, if nobody is picking up those issues and enforcing them, then somebody must demand that those issues are enforced. Okay, so it's the same as the Public Accounts Committee or the Auditor General making adverse findings, and then people go and sit before the Public Accounts Committee and they laugh over issues that one would have thought are more serious for them to. So it's not so much, I guess PIAC is not so interested in prosecuting or ensuring that things are that. PIAC are interested in seeing their recommendations implemented. So if it's not being given powers to do that by themselves, they would like to see people acting upon those recommendations. So if people like Occupy Ghana can also take up some of these recommendations and push it, just like they're doing in the case of the Auditor General's report. So be it. I don't think PIAC is crazy about having powers. But bottom line, the way I see it,
okay,
that
now,
PIAC wouldn't want to keep rehashing recommendations when nobody.
All right, so now, does it also give an indication that your previous, or PIAC's previous findings have unearthed wanton dissipation of state resources by persons close to such resources?
It's not, could you please repeat that?
Yes, my question is that this call has been made over and over again. Does it point to the fact that persons close to these resources are misusing the fund or dipping their hands into such oil and gas
I'm not
resources?
sure PIAC can ever arrive at that conclusion until the only place where PIAC can do that is when they look at how the ABFA monies have been spent. So unfortunately, PIAC still doesn't have all the details to be able to come to those conclusions, because when they just tell you that money went to Project A and you don't even know who received the money, you cannot draw that conclusion. But all that PIAC is saying, and if I heard them correctly, then they are asking for action to be taken on things they find which are not right, and they don't think are consistent with the spirit and the letter of the act that established them. But you just have to take a look at some of the previous reports. At the beginning of those reports, the PIAC actually captures most of their recommendations. They also present the status of those recommendations, whether the people who were supposed to have acted on them actually did act or not. And it tells you that there are a lot of issues that are still hanging. There are things that they'll recommend that maybe GMPC does. For example, let me give you a typical example. Ministry of Finance borrowed money from GMP, $50 million. And we've been, I think, PIAC for the past 3-4 years, check all their reports. We are asking and calling for the money to be refunded. The money hasn't been refunded. PIAC tells GMPC that, look, your core mandate is not to be constructing roads. So last year you spent $25 million constructing the Western Corridor Road. PIAC is finding out that GMPC is still constructing the road. Is it that they don't care, they come before that? And these are all in the PIAC's report. So I think that's all that they are trying to say. And probably I'm not their spokesperson, but they are demanding action on their recommendations.
All right, now finally, before you go, Sankofa is coming on stream later in August or later part of the year. Do you think PIAC is well equipped to actually monitor proceedings or proceeds of the third development of Ghana's oil and gas?
I think PIAC, so long as they are not required to be on the rigs or on the FPSO, they should, it's just like any of the other fields. Somebody, the GRA, the GMPC, the Bank of Ghana, they are required to ensure that PIAC gets the information as presented to them. I mean, I know PIAC.
All right, thank you very much, Ishmael Jokumi. He is a former member of PIAC and also executive director of the Kumasi Institute of Technology and Environment, KIAT. Moving on, deciding on what area of business to launch into is always a matter of debate and requires taking chances. That's how Anne Amenuvo started Play Portrait Ghana, a jigsaw puzzle. All right, so we get a story on the Joy Business Fund. Let's have a teaser.
In her garage, now converted into a workspace, Anne Amenuvo makes jigsaw puzzles.
Jigsaw puzzles is something that most of us are familiar with. It's an interactive, working plaything people of all ages can have fun with. So Play Portrait GH came about as a way of using jigsaw puzzles to express yourself. So what we usually do is you send us your photo, we make the jigsaw puzzle for you, and then you can add your own personal message and give to friends for all occasions, whether they are birthdays, weddings, anniversaries.
Get the full story later in the day on Business Live. And that's it for the marketplace today. My name is Emmanuel Boachi Biafi. Thank you very much for your company, and do meet me again same time tomorrow. Good afternoon.